Hi guys, this is Miss Ebener here today with your English 2 content. I am going to be reading An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by Ambrose Bierce. So what I would suggest would be to pull up the PDF and read along with me. I'll read it out loud. I'll stop as we go to explain anything that might be confusing. Just make sure it's clear what's happening in the story, which I think will be helpful as we read. So like I said, just go ahead and pull up the PDF and listen to me read it, and I think that it'll be very helpful and you'll hopefully enjoy the story. So I'm going to pull up my PDF. I'm going to scroll past the author's information down to the beginning of the story, which for me is on page 604. And here we go. An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by Ambrose Bierce. A man stood upon a railroad bridge in northern Alabama, looking down into the swift water 20 feet below. The man's hands were behind his back, the wrists bound with a cord. A rope closely encircled his neck. It was attached to a stout cross timber above his head, and the slack fell to the level of his knees. Some loose boards laid upon the sleepers supporting the metals of the railway supplied a footing for him and his executioners, 2 private soldiers of the Federal Army, directed by a sergeant who in civil life may have been a deputy sheriff. At a short remove upon the same temporary platform was an officer in the uniform of his rank, armed. He was a captain. A sentinel at each end of the bridge stood with his rifle in the position known as support, that is to say, vertical, in front of the left shoulder, the hammer resting on the forearm, thrown straight across the chest, a formal and unnatural position, enforcing an erect carriage of the body. It did not appear to be the duty of these 2 men to know what was occurring at the center of the bridge. They merely blockaded the 2 ends of the foot planking that traversed it. Beyond one of the sentinels, nobody was in sight. The railroad ran straight away into a forest for 100 yards, then, curving, was lost to view. Doubtless there was an outpost farther along. The other bank of the stream was open ground, a gentle acclivity topped with a stockade of vertical tree trunks, loopholed for rifles, with a single embrasure through which protruded the muzzle of a brass cannon commanding the bridge. Midway of the slope between bridge and fort were the spectators, a single company of infantry in line, at parade rest, the butts of the rifles on the ground, the barrels inclining slightly backward against the right shoulder, the hands crossed upon the stock. A lieutenant stood at the right of the line, the point of his sword upon the ground, his left hand resting upon his right. Excepting the group of 4 at the center of the bridge, not a man moved. The company faced the bridge, staring stonily, motionless. The sentinels, facing the banks of the stream, might have been statues to adorn the bridge. The captain stood with folded arms, silent, observing the work of his subordinates, but making no sign. Death is a dignitary who, when he comes announced, is to be received with formal manifestations of respect, even by those most familiar with him. In the code of military etiquette, silence and fixity are forms of deference. So just to pause here to say what's going on, there's some pictures that I've scrolled past on the PDF that you can see. So the one that I'm looking at is of a railroad bridge, and you can kind of see that the railroad bridge goes over like a creek or a stream, right? So that's kind of the situation that we have here. There is a railroad bridge, and there's a guy that's tied up in the middle of it, right? And if you didn't quite pick up on it, he's standing like on a plank that's resting on the railroad bridge on the middle, right? And so he's standing on this end over the water, and then on this end, there's another guy standing there. So he's tied up, right? And they made mention of death. So if you're not quite getting this, he's about to be hanged, right? There are people there that are watching on either end of the bridge. There's people on the slope across the water with their guns, and there's a cannon, and they're all soldiers, right? So all these soldiers are there watching like a hanging that's about to take place, right? So again, he's on the bridge. He's standing right here. There's a guy on the other end. So how it's going to work basically is when the soldier steps off, the board's going to go down, right? And the guy's tied up. He's got a noose, so he'll be hanged off of the center of the bridge. So it's kind of confusing until you can kind of visualize what's going on there. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So we're going to keep going, but just to make sure you understand the setting there, and that picture is kind of helpful, like I said. Okay, so I'm going to pick up back where I left off on 606. The man who was engaged in being hanged was apparently about 35 years of age. He was a civilian, if one might judge from his habit, which was that of a planter. So when they say planter, I think they mean like a farmer. His features were good, a straight nose, firm mouth, broad forehead, from which his long dark hair was combed straight back, falling behind his ears to the collar of his well-fitting frock coat. He wore a mustache and pointed beard, but no whiskers. His eyes were large and gray, and had a kindly expression, which one would hardly have expected in one whose neck was in the hemp. So, like in the noose, right? Evidently, this was no vulgar assassin. The liberal military code makes provision for hanging many kinds of persons, and gentlemen are not excluded. I always think that line is kind of funny. Like, they'll hang whoever they need to hang, right? Like, it doesn't matter if he's a nice guy. So, again, this is the military hanging him, right? So we don't know why he's being hanged, but there's like a captain and there's sergeants and stuff like that. So this is the military hanging this guy. The preparations being complete, the two private soldiers stepped aside and each drew away the plank upon which he had been standing. The sergeant turned to the captain, saluted, and placed himself immediately behind that officer, who in turn moved apart one pace. These movements left the condemned man and the sergeant standing on the two ends of the same plank, which spanned 3 of the cross ties of the bridge. The end upon which the civilian stood almost, but not quite, reached a 4th. This plank had been held in place by the weight of the captain. It was now held by that of the sergeant. At a signal from the former, the latter would step aside, the plank would tilt, and the condemned man go down between 2 ties. The arrangement commended itself to his judgment as simple and effective. His face had not been covered, nor his eyes bandaged. He looked a moment at his unsteadfast footing, then let his gaze wander to the swirling water of the stream racing madly beneath his feet. A piece of dancing driftwood caught his attention, and his eyes followed it down the current. How slowly it appeared to move. What a sluggish stream. So there's a little side note here on our textbook's PDF that says point of view. Note that the third person point of view narrows from omniscient to limited. So it kind of means that, like, in the beginning, there's almost like just somebody above watching the whole scene. Like, okay, I can see these guys standing on the bridge and these guys are on the stream over there. But then it kind of switches to the viewpoint of the guy being hanged, right? He is sitting there. His head's not covered, so he can see, and it's not bandaged. He can see everything, and he sees that he's on this plank, right? And once the guy behind him steps off, he's going down. And then he notices, like, driftwood in the water, and he's like, wow, it's going by so slowly. Like, what an interesting thing to notice, you know? Especially because it says the stream is like dancing and swirling water, the stream racing madly beneath his feet, but then he notices the wood, the log in the water, just sluggishly moving along. So kind of interesting, right? But now we're in his viewpoint. Okay, he's going to be hanged. He closed his eyes in order to fix his last thoughts upon his wife and children. The water, touched to gold by the early sun, the brooding mists under the banks at some distance down the stream, the fort, the soldiers, the piece of drift, all had distracted him. And now he became conscious of a new disturbance. Striking through the thought of his dear ones was a sound which he could neither ignore nor understand, a sharp, distinct, metallic percussion like the stroke of a blacksmith's hammer upon the anvil. It had the same ringing quality. He wondered what it was, and whether immeasurably distant or nearby, it seemed both. Its recurrence was regular, but as slow as the tolling of a death knell. He awaited each stroke with impatience, and he knew not why, apprehension. The intervals of silence grew progressively longer. The delays became maddening. With their greater infrequency, the sounds increased in strength and sharpness. They hurt his ear like the thrust of a knife. He feared he would shriek. What he heard was the ticking of his watch. I always think that part's kind of interesting. So he hears like a clanging over and over again. He says it sounds like almost a blacksmith hitting something or a church bell ringing over and over and over again, and it's loud, and at one point he's like, I'm going to yell, it hurts my ears so much. And then he's like, oh, it's his watch going tick, tick, tick. You know, so this is just an interesting, like, perspective that he can hear his watch ticking by, and it seems so loud to him, but a watch is not very loud, right? A clock ticking is not loud at all. So, again, kind of some weird perspective here of what he can see and hear. He unclosed his eyes and saw again the water below him. If I could free my hands, he thought, I might throw off the noose and spring into the stream. By diving, I could evade the bullets and, swimming vigorously, reach the bank, take to the woods, and get away home. My home, thank God, is as yet outside their lines. My wife and little ones are still beyond the invaders' farthest advance. At these thoughts, which have here to be set down in words, were flashed into the doomed man's brain rather than evolved from it, the captain nodded to the sergeant. The sergeant stepped aside. Okay, so we know what's going to happen when the sergeant steps aside, right? The blank's going to go, he's going to fall in. But then you can see we have a little break here because then it has like a numeral 2 and it's going to go into maybe some kind of flashback or flash forward. It's going to be some kind of break in the story, right? So we don't know if he's going to fall in the water. We're going to keep reading here. Peyton Farquhar was a well-to-do planter of an old and highly respected Alabama family. Being a slave owner, and like other slave owners, a politician, he was naturally an original secessionist and ardently devoted to the Southern cause. So, just a little bit of background on this story here. If you know anything about Ambrose Bierce, if you've learned about him, this is kind of set during the Civil War. So, if you know much about the Civil War, there's the North and the South, right? And the South, very famously, was kind of pro-slavery. They seceded from the North, so they did not want to be a part of America anymore. They wanted to be their own country, but it caused the Civil War, right? So, this guy is a Southerner. It says that he's a planter, like we know. We said that probably means farmer. And he's a slave owner, it says. So he's a true Southerner. He wanted to secede, meaning he wanted wanted the South to be separate from America. And then this is, again, kind of the setting of the Civil War. So we don't know, like, if he fought for the South or what. We're going to learn more. But that's kind of the setting. We got North and South. We've got the slave owners and the abolitionists wanted the slaves free generally, right? It's kind of complicated, but basically you got North and South, and that's going to play a part in this story here. So, we know he's a Southerner, okay? Circumstances of an imperious nature, which it is unnecessary to relate here, had prevented him from taking service with the gallant army that had fought the disastrous campaigns ending with the fall of Corinth, and he chafed under the inglorious restraint, longing for the release of his energies, the larger life of the soldier, the opportunity for distinction. The opportunity he felt would come, as it comes to all in wartime. Meanwhile, he did what he could. So this guy's not a soldier, right? It says that they don't really explain why, but he wasn't able to join the army, okay? But he wanted to do something to help the Southern cause. No service was too humble for him to perform in aid of the South, no adventure too perilous for him to undertake, if consistent with the character of a civilian who was at heart a soldier, and who in good faith and without too much qualification assented to at least a part of the frankly villainous dictum that all is fair in love and war. One evening, while Farquhar and his wife were sitting on a rustic bench near the entrance to his grounds, a gray-clad soldier rode up to the gate and asked for a drink of water. Okay, so one other important thing to know is that they wore very distinctive colors. The Southern Army wore gray, so like the Confederacy is the South, the Confederate South. They wore a gray uniform, and the North wore, I believe, like a dark blue uniform. Okay, so when we see this guy in the gray clothes, we're like, oh, okay, he's a Southern soldier, right? So again, this Peyton Farquhar guy, he wanted to help the South, even though he couldn't be a soldier himself. He would do anything to kind of help the Southern cause, right? Even though he was just a civilian. Okay, so that's kind of where he is. This gray uniformed soldier walks up to his house. So he's like, oh, okay, a Southern soldier, right? And again, the thing that's unique about the Civil War, that's different from any other war in American history, I think, well, it's very, very different. Obviously, it's the Civil War, but this was like North and South fighting each other, so it was like family members fighting family members. Like, if your brother lived in the North and you lived in the South, like, you might have been fighting each other, right? So, and everything was very close. Like, states were obviously bordering each other that were at war with each other. So, it's pretty crazy that everything was so close together. It really tore the country apart, too, in that way. Okay, so this soldier in a gray uniform walks up to the house, right? A gray-clad soldier rode up to the gate and asked for a drink of water. Mrs. Farquhar was only too happy to serve him with her own white hands. While she was fetching the water, her husband approached the dusty horseman and inquired eagerly for news from the front. "The Yanks are repairing the railroads," said the man, "and are getting ready for another advance. They have reached Owl Creek Bridge, put in order and built a stockade on the north bank. The commandant has issued an order, which is posted everywhere, declaring that any civilian caught interfering with the railroad, its bridges, tunnels, or trains will be summarily hanged. I saw the order." "How far is it to the Owl Creek Bridge?" Farquhar asked. "About 30 miles. "Is there no force on this side of the creek?" "Only a picket post half a mile out on the railroad and a single sentinel at this end of the bridge." "Suppose a man, a civilian, and a student of hanging should elude the picket post and perhaps get the better of the sentinel," said Farquhar, smiling. "What could he accomplish?" The soldier reflected. "I was there a month ago," he replied. "I observed that the flood of last winter had lodged a great quantity of driftwood against the wooden pier at this end of the bridge. It is now dry and would burn like tow." The lady had now brought the water, which the soldier drank. He thanked her ceremoniously, bowed to her husband, and rode away. An hour later, after nightfall, he repassed the plantation, going northward in the direction from which he had come. He was a Federal scout. Okay, so it's kind of interesting that use of the word Federal scout there basically means he was a Northern spy, right? So even though he was wearing a gray uniform, he was actually a Northern soldier, so he was a spy. So you kind of get the idea, too, of how this guy ends up being hanged. This spy comes in and, asks for a drink of water all innocently, but really he's a spy, right, secretly. And the homeowner, Peyton Farquhar, is like asking about, "Oh, how's everything going with the military movements?" "Oh, well, there's this railroad bridge, and the North is advancing across it," and he kind of lays the seeds of like, you could go mess with that bridge. You might even be able to light it on fire, and you could destroy the bridge and kind of stop the Northern Army, right? So this guy, Peyton Farquhar, is like, yeah, man, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go destroy this bridge. Like, it should be easy. But this guy was a spy the whole time, so we can kind of infer here that he gets caught, right? Either he's totally unsuccessful, or he tries to do it and he gets caught, or he might have gotten caught even just approaching it because the spy kind of knew what would happen, right? So this Southerner, Peyton Farquhar, he gets caught trying to mess with the bridge, and now, as we know, he's getting hanged for it, right? So you can see now that there's a numeral number 3, so we're going to jump again in time, probably back to him being hanged, right? So we got that little flashback there of kind of like what he's being hanged for. Okay. As Peyton Farquhar fell straight downward through the bridge, he lost consciousness and was as one already dead. From this state he awakened, ages later, it seemed to him, by the pain of a sharp pressure upon his throat, followed by a sense of suffocation. Keen, poignant agonies seemed to shoot from his neck downward through every fiber of his body and limbs. These pains appeared to flash along well-defined lines of ramification and to beat with an inconceivably rapid periodicity. They seemed like streams of pulsating fire, heating him to an intolerable temperature. Right? So this guy is in the process of being hanged, right? I mean, he has fallen between the ties of the railroad bridge. He's hanging there, and he just feels nothing but intense pain all radiating out from the noose around his neck, right? He feels nothing but agony, pain, because he's in the middle of dying. He's in the middle of being hanged. As to his head, he was conscious of nothing but a feeling of fullness, of congestion. These sensations were unaccompanied by thought. The intellectual part of his nature was already effaced. He had power only to feel, and feeling was torment. He was conscious of motion, encompassed in a luminous cloud, of which he was now merely the fiery heart. Without material substance, he swung through unthinkable arcs of oscillation, like a vast pendulum. So if you know what a pendulum is in a clock, it goes back and forward, right? So he's hanging there, and he feels his body swinging back and forth from the rope tied to the top of the bridge. Then all at once, with terrible suddenness, the light about him shot upward with the noise of a loud splash, and a frightful roaring was in his ears, and all was cold and dark. The power of thought was restored. He knew that the rope had broken, and he had fallen into the stream. So pretty lucky dude, right? Instead of just being hanged there around his neck, the rope killing him, the rope breaks, and so he's fallen into the water. Pretty crazy. Let's see. Fallen into the stream. There was no additional strangulation. The noose about his neck was already suffocating him and kept the water from his lungs. To die of hanging at the bottom of a river, the idea seemed to him ludicrous. I always think that's funny. Like, he falls into the river and he's like, oh, I'm going to drown. Oh, I'm not going to drown because I'm literally being strangled by a rope still. So it's just kind of funny in a sad way. He opened his eyes in the darkness and saw above him a gleam of light. But how distant, how inaccessible. He was still sinking, for the light became fainter and fainter until it was a mere glimmer. Then it began to grow and brighten, and he knew that he was rising toward the surface. Knew it with reluctance, for he was now very comfortable. To be hanged and drowned, he thought, that is not so bad, but I do not wish to be shot. No, I will not be shot. That is not fair. I think that's another funny part, right? He's being strangled from a noose. He could drown at the bottom of this river, but if he goes back up to the top, he's rising toward the top, he sees the light coming toward him, you can imagine the other people are going to see him, right? The bank was lined with soldiers. There's soldiers on the bridge. They all have rifles. It was already stated, and there's a cannon, I think. So it's like, oh, shoot, if I end up going back to the top of the water, like, I'm going to be shot as well. He says, that's not fair. I just think it's a funny line. Okay. No, I will not be shot. That is not fair. He was not conscious of an effort, but a sharp pain in his wrist apprised him that he was trying to free his hands. He gave the struggle his attention, as an idler might observe the feat of a juggler, without interest in the outcome. What splendid effort, what magnificent, what superhuman strength! Ah, that was a fine endeavor. Bravo! The cord fell away. His arms parted and floated upward, the hands dimly seen on each side in the growing light. So he's able to undo the rope around his wrists, right? He's not tied up anymore from his wrists, so he breaks them free somehow. It says, what superhuman strength. He's able to get untied, and then his arms are free. He watched them with a new interest, as first one and then the other pounced upon the noose at his neck. They tore it away and thrust it fiercely aside, its undulations resembling those of a water snake. Put it back! Put it back! He thought he shouted these words to his hands, for the undoing of the noose had been succeeded by the direst pang that he had yet experienced. His neck ached horribly. His brain was on fire. His heart, which had been fluttering faintly, gave a great leap, trying to force itself out at his mouth. His whole body was racked and wrenched with an insupportable anguish. But his disobedient hands gave no heed to the command. They beat the water vigorously with quick downward strokes, forcing him to the surface. I just think that part's interesting too. He says, put the noose back, it hurts so bad. If you've ever had something like really tightly around your body, like for me, I've had like a hair tie that's on my wrist too tight, and then it almost hurts more when you take it off because there's like an indent and you're like, oh, like rubbing it like it really hurts. I don't know if you've ever had this experience of tying anything around your body anywhere, right? Where it's like it hurts kind of more when it's off because there's like an indent or even like a welt or something there, right? So his neck then, when the noose is gone, hurts so bad. He's like, oh my God, this is the worst pain, was taking off the noose, strangely enough. But he's swimming toward the sunlight, right? He's swimming toward the top of the water. They beat the water vigorously with quick downward strokes, forcing him to the surface. He felt his head emerge. His eyes were blinded by the sunlight. His chest expanded convulsively, and with a supreme and crowning agony, his lungs engulfed a great draught of air, which instantly he expelled in a shriek. I'm like, dude, don't get to the top of the water and then yell, right? He gets to the top of the water and he yells as soon as he gets up there, probably trying to get air in his lungs, right, from being underwater. But he yells. He gets to the top of the stream and he yells. I'm like, everyone's going to see you now. Like, oh my God. Okay. He was now in full possession of his physical senses. They were indeed preternaturally keen and alert. Something in the awful disturbance of his organic system had so exalted and refined them that they made record of things never before perceived. He felt the ripples upon his face and heard their separate sounds as they struck. He looked at the forest on the bank of the stream, saw the individual trees, the leaves, and the veining of each leaf. Saw the very insects upon them, the locusts, the brilliant-bodied flies, the gray spiders stretching their webs from twig to twig. He noted the prismatic colors in all of the dewdrops upon a million blades of grass, the humming of the gnats that danced above the eddies of the stream, the beating of the dragonfly's wings, the strokes of the water spider's legs like the oars which had lifted their boat. All these made audible music. A fish slid along beneath his eyes, and he heard the rush of its body parting the water. I think this part's interesting because, again, it's getting a little, supernatural. I'm like, you're in the middle of a stream. You can't possibly see every tree along the shore, every leaf upon that tree, and, the dewdrops on the tree and on the grass. And he sees, colors on, a bumblebee's wings. I'm like, okay, it's getting a little trippy, right? He imagines that he can see all these colors, and he said it made, audible music. He can literally hear the ripples of the water bouncing off of his face. So it's getting a little trippy, right? Okay. He had come to the surface, facing down the stream. In a moment, the visible world seemed to wheel slowly round, himself the pivotal point, and he saw the bridge, the fort, the soldiers upon the bridge, the captain, the sergeant, the two privates, his executioners. They were in silhouette against the blue sky. They shouted and gesticulated, pointing at him. The captain had drawn his pistol, but did not fire. The others were unarmed. Their movements were grotesque and horrible, their forms gigantic. So it's also kind of interesting to me how he views the soldiers on the bridge. He says they're silhouetted and they look like monsters or something, grotesque and horrible, their forms gigantic, and they're not shooting at him yet. I'm like, they're not shooting at him? Get out of there, dude. So he sees them on the bridge, and he's kind of swirling around in the water, and he sees the fort and the stream and all the people on the stream, and he sees everybody, right? Okay. Suddenly, he heard a sharp report, and something struck the water smartly within a few inches of his head, spattering his face with spray. Oh, gee, I wonder what that can be. You're being shot at. He heard a second report and saw one of the sentinels with his rifle at his shoulder, a light cloud of blue smoke rising from the muzzle. The man in the water saw the eye of the man on the bridge, gazing into his own through the sights of the rifle. He observed that it was a gray eye, and remembered having read that gray eyes were keenest, and that all famous marksmen had them. Nevertheless, this one had missed. I think, like I said, it's interesting that he can see this. He can see through the rifle's scope that the guy shooting at him has a gray eye. How possibly can you see that? How far away are you, too? You're in the stream, he's on the bridge. What? But he can see this guy has a gray eye. And he remembered learning that, sharpshooters have gray eyes, but this guy missed him somehow, okay? It's, again, kind of trippy and, supernatural. How can he possibly see this, right? A counter swirl had caught Farquhar and turned him half round. He was again looking into the forest on the bank opposite the fort. The sound of a clear, high voice in a monotonous sing-song now rang out behind him and came across the water with a distinctness that pierced and subdued all other sounds, even the beating of the ripples in his ears. Although no soldier, he had frequented camps enough to know the dread significance of that deliberate, drawling, aspirated chant. The lieutenant on shore was taking a part in the morning's work. How coldly and pitilessly, with what an even, calm intonation, presaging and enforcing tranquility in the men, with what accurately measured intervals, fell those cruel words. Attention! Company! Shoulder! Arms! Ready! Aim! Fire! So they're going to shoot at him, right? He hears the chant, and they're going to shoot at him. Farquhar dived as deeply as he could. The water roared in his ears like the voice of Niagara, yet he heard the dull thunder of the volley and, rising again toward the surface, met shining bits of metal, singularly flattened, oscillating slowly downward. Some of them touched him on the face and hands and then fell away, continuing their descent. One lodged between his collar and neck. It was uncomfortably warm, and he snatched it out. So they shoot at him, right? But they miss. They hit the top of the water, so it doesn't. And had dived down deep below, so it didn't hit him. And he even touches a bullet. It gets lodged in his collar. He's like, "Oh, that's hot," right? But they all miss him. Crazy. As he rose to the surface, gasping for breath, he saw that he had been a long time underwater. He was perceptibly farther downstream, nearer to safety. The soldiers had almost finished reloading. The metal ramrods flashed all at once in the sunshine as they were drawn from the barrels, turned in the air, and thrust into their sockets. The two sentinels fired again, independently and ineffectually. The hunted man saw all this over his shoulder. He was now swimming vigorously with the current. His brain was as energetic as his arms and legs. He thought with the rapidity of lightning. The officer, he reasoned, will not make that martinet's error a second time. It is as easy to dodge a volley as a single shot. He has probably already given the command to fire at will. God help me, I cannot dodge them all. So he's trying to make his escape, right? He is farther down the stream, and he's like, oh, shoot, I might actually get out of this. But they're going to shoot at him just randomly. They're going to just start shooting. People on the bank, people on the bridge. So he's like, I got to try to dodge all these. Let's see. I cannot dodge them all. An appalling splash within 2 yards of him was followed by a loud, rushing sound, diminuendo, which seemed to travel back through the air to the fort and died in an explosion which stirred the very river to its deeps. A rising sheet of water curved over him, fell down upon him, blinded him, strangled him. The cannon had taken a hand in the game. As he shook his head free from the commotion of the smitten water, he heard the deflected shot humming through the air ahead, and in an instant it was cracking and smashing the branches in the forest beyond. So the cannon has fired at him, right? Again, and missed. The water splashes over him, but it missed him. And then it shoots again, I think, into the tree branches, and it misses him. They will not do that again, he thought. The next time, they will use a charge of grape. So there's a footnote there's just some footnotes here if you're reading the PDF, and it says that it's like grape shot, right? Which is a lot of like small little shots fired at you from a cannon, but it shoots a lot of them all at once. So he's like, oh, now they're going to shoot me with grape shot, I bet. Like, he's pretty rational, despite like just having escaped death and still trying to escape it. The next time they will use a charge of grape. I must keep my eye upon the gun. The smoke will apprise me. The report arrives too late. It lags behind the missile. That is a good gun. Suddenly, he felt himself whirled round and round like a spinning top. The water, the banks, the forests, the now distant bridge, fort, and men, all were commingled and blurred. Objects were represented by their colors only, circular horizontal streaks of color. That was all he saw. He had been caught in a vortex and was being whirled on with a velocity of advance and gyration that made him giddy and sick. In a few moments, he was flung upon the gravel at the foot of the left bank of the stream, the southern bank, and behind a projecting point which concealed him from his enemies. The sudden arrest of his motion, the abrasion of one of his hands on the gravel, restored him, and he wept with delight. He dug his fingers into the sand, threw it over himself in handfuls, and audibly blessed it. It looked like diamonds, rubies, emeralds. He could think of nothing beautiful which it did not resemble. The trees upon the bank were giant garden plants. He noted a definite order in their arrangement, inhaled the fragrance of their blooms. A strange, roseate light shone through the spaces among their trunks, and the wind made in their branches the music of Aeolian harps. He had no wish to perfect his escape, was content to remain in that enchanting spot until retaken. So he lands right on the shore, And to me, this makes me think of when people who have been like flying for a long time or like on a boat for a long time finally land and they're like solid ground and they like kiss the ground that they're on. You know what I mean? Like they're so excited to be on solid ground again. That's what this makes me think of, because he lands on the shore and he's like, sand, sand. And he says it looks like diamonds and emeralds and stuff, like it looks like jewels. And then he looks up at the trees and they look so beautiful, and it's like he hears the music again. He's so grateful to like not be in the water. He's on land and he's like, shoot, did I just like escape? Maybe. And he's just there like celebrating, right? He literally even said, it said he had no wish to perfect his escape. He was content to remain in that enchanting spot until retaken. So like he's gonna sit there. I'm like, dude, get out of there. Like they're gonna come for you. But he's there like just celebrating, right? The fact that he like made this escape at all. Okay. A whiz and rattle of grape shot among the branches high above his head roused him from his dream. The baffled cannoneer had fired him a random farewell. He sprang to his feet, rushed up the sloping bank, and plunged into the forest. So he's gonna run now. I'm like, yeah, dude, you can do it. Like, run. All that day he traveled, laying his course by the rounding sun. The forest seemed interminable. Nowhere did he discover a break in it, not even a woodman's road. So that word interminable, it says, means endless. Like, he's just going in this forest and he doesn't even see a road. He doesn't see anyone's house. Like, he doesn't see anything, right? He had not known that he lived in so wild a region. There was something uncanny in the revelation. By nightfall, he was fatigued, footsore, famishing. The thought of his wife and children urged him on. So he's been running like literally all night, right? Through this woods. At last, he found a road, which led him in what he knew to be the right direction. It was as wide and straight as a city street, yet it seemed untraveled. No fields bordered it, no dwelling anywhere. Not so much as the barking of a dog suggested human habitation. The black bodies of the trees formed a straight wall on both sides, terminating on the horizon in a point, like a diagram in a lesson in perspective. Overhead, he looked up through this rift in the wood, shone great golden stars. Overhead, as he looked up through this rift in the wood, shone great golden stars, looking unfamiliar and grouped in strange constellations. He was sure they were arranged in some order, which had a secret and malign significance. The wood on either side was full of singular noises, among which, once, twice, and again he distinctly heard whispers in an unknown tongue. So this part of him, like, traveling through the woods is even more trippy to me, because he's, like, going through the woods. He doesn't see any roads at all. I'm like, okay. But it's like the trees are just a wall on either side of him. He looks up and he sees the stars and he thinks they're, like, speaking to him in a strange foreign language. I'm like, dude, you're tired, you're hungry, you almost got killed. I think you're hallucinating. Like, you're losing it, you know? It's getting pretty crazy. But I want him to just keep going because I want him to escape, you know? Okay. His neck was in pain, and lifting his hand to it, he found it horribly swollen. He knew that it had a circle of black where the rope had bruised it. His eyes felt congested. He could no longer close them. His tongue was swollen with thirst. He relieved its fever by thrusting it forward from between his teeth into the cold air. How softly the turf had carpeted the untraveled avenue. He could no longer feel the roadway beneath his feet. Doubtless, despite his suffering, he had fallen asleep while walking. For now, he sees another scene. So I'm like, did he fall asleep somehow? Like I said, I think he's losing it because he is on the verge of death here. But he thinks he fell asleep while walking. For now, he sees another scene. Perhaps he has merely recovered from a delirium. He stands at the gate of his own home. All is as he left it, and all bright and beautiful in the morning sunshine. He must have traveled the entire night. As he pushes open the gate and passes up the wide white walk, he sees a flutter of female garments. His wife, looking fresh and cool and sweet, steps down from the veranda to meet him. At the bottom of the steps, she stands waiting with a smile of ineffable joy, an attitude of matchless grace and dignity. Ah, how beautiful she is! He springs forward with extended arms. As he is about to clasp her, he feels a stunning blow upon the back of the neck. A blinding white light blazes all about him with a sound like the shock of a cannon. And then all is darkness and silence. Peyton Farquhar was dead. His body, with a broken neck, swung gently from side to side beneath the timbers of the Owl Creek Bridge. Ah, what a crazy ending! So he was dead the whole time! It's such a crazy ending. So if you're like, what? What did I just read? What the heck just happened? He is swinging at the end, right? So the rope didn't break. He didn't fall in the stream. He didn't go in the water. He didn't escape. He didn't run through the... Nothing that happened. I mean, he actually did die. His body with a broken neck swung gently from side to side beneath the timbers of the Owl Creek Bridge. So the whole story was basically a hallucination. You're like, what the heck? What did I just read? The whole story was kind of his hallucination. To me, it makes me think of when people say, like when they're on their deathbed, like, oh, my whole life flashed before my eyes or whatever, right? Like, it makes me think of that because he, like, has this vision that he escapes, right? I mean, that the rope breaks, that he gets in the water, that he avoids their shots, that he gets in the forest and he runs home and he sees his wife again and he's about to hug her. And then that's when he's like, oh, wait, I'm not really escaping, right? I'm dead. I think it's so interesting when you know the ending to go back and, if not even just read it, like read the whole thing again, but just like think back on certain scenes, because once you know the ending, you're like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. Like, it's very clearly a hallucination because he thinks all these things are happening that couldn't possibly happen, right? So like his perception of his senses, right? Like, he thinks he can see dewdrops on blades of grass. He can hear the flap of a fly's wings and stuff like that. So he thinks he hears even like the stars talking to him at one point, right? And he thinks that he walked in his sleep. So like through the night, like through a forest. So all that stuff is like pretty suspect, right? Like, you're like, no normal person could have these sensations. I don't think they couldn't see these things or hear these things, right? But then also, like, if you really think about his escape, it doesn't really make any sense. Like, how, number one, why would the rope break? Is that likely? Number two, how do you get the ropes off your hands? Like, you couldn't get them off your hands earlier, so how could you get them off your hands underwater? And then how could you avoid every single shot of the soldiers and a cannon firing at you? Like, the more you think about it, the more you're just like, that's very unrealistic. Now that you know the ending, right? When you're reading it, you're just like, oh man, this guy's lucky. But once you know, you're like, yeah, there's no way. Like, it becomes more and more like crazy and like I said, kind of trippy or like supernatural. So I think it's like a surprise ending, but then it has some added depth because once you know the ending, it makes the story more interesting to like read again. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this story. There is going to be a video linked, and the video is a really good video. It's actually an episode of The Twilight Zone that was made like in the 60s. So if you're a fan of like old movies or anything, and you don't even have to be, even if you're like, I hate old movies, I think you'd like this movie. It's a short movie. It's like a TV episode long of Owl Creek Bridge, and it's black and white, and there's hardly any dialogue. And so it's like pretty interesting and cool to see like the visualization of it. So I really love this story. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. I hope me reading it was helpful, and I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!